Okay, I think we will get started a couple of minutes past the hour. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's special edition webinar from the International Federation of Horse Racing Authorities Council on Anti-Legal Betting and Related Crime. We've got shy of just 140 of you registered for today from all across the world, as well as from all walks of life, including national sports associations, anti-corruption agencies, horse racing regulatory boards, and independent think tanks. Thank you all again for joining us. My name is Douglas Robinson, as the IFHA Council Director and today's webinar moderator, which today is on gambling harm and how it's fueled by illegal betting. Before we start, it's a good opportunity to remind you all of what the Council does. With 27 members across the globe, the Council exists to foster greater cooperation amongst stakeholders to better combat the threat of illegal betting, as well as related criminal activity to the integrity of horse racing, as well as other sports in general, primarily by producing regular thought leadership, either through reports and via presentations such as this one. It's pertinent to be discussing illegal betting-induced gambling harm as the UN General Assembly meets later today to talk about the promotion of mental health and well-being, as well as the Programme of Action for Youth globally, both topics of which illegal betting-caused gambling harm feed into. It's against this backdrop, as well as the steady drumbeat of responsible gambling media reports, whether they be on enhanced customer protection, the possible use of AI to help identify at-risk gamblers, or regulated betting operators getting sanctioned for license breaches, that I would like to introduce our three council experts that will speak today. First up is Dr. Sally Gainsbury, Professor in the School of Psychology at the University of Sydney and Director of the Gambling Treatment and Research Clinic. She has 20 years of experience leading research to understand gambling harm and has guided the development of many policies, practices, and interventions to reduce the damage caused by gambling disorder. Dr. Gainsbury has received numerous grants, awards, as well as fellowships, recognizing her contributions, including being a 2025 Churchill Trust Fellow. She has provided expert academic advice to regulators, policymakers, and organizations internationally, as well as published over 150 peer-reviewed articles and 2 books, and built capacity in the field through her supervision of students and research staff. Next is Martin Purbrick, the Council's Chair. Martin has spent 32 years working in Asia, most recently as the Director of Security and Integrity here at the Hong Kong Jockey Club. He started his career in 1988 in the Royal Hong Kong Police, serving in roles involving intelligence-led investigations into Chinese organized crime, as well as triad societies, illegal betting and gambling, arms dealing, and terrorism. Last but by no means least, Luca Esposito, the Executive Director of the World Lottery Association and the General Secretary of the United Lotteries for Integrity in Sport. He has extensive knowledge and experience of technology and betting, as well as significant insight into how IT is utilized by global betting operators to ensure that customers are protected when betting and not channeled to unregulated betting operators. Before we get started, ladies and gentlemen, please, some quick notes. Please note that the webinar will be recorded and we will run for an hour. We'll do our best to keep things on schedule and wrap up properly. Please feel free to drop off if you have other engagements to go to at the end of the hour. Please put any questions you might have to the panelists in the Zoom Q&A chat function. We will try to get through as many of these questions as possible with the time that we've got. If you have any technical issues, please message myself or Doris, and we will do our utmost to try and assist you. Please do provide us with any feedback you might have on these webinars and on the Council presentations. Last but not least, please do sign up for our newsletters and other publications via the QR code that you can see on this screen as you see fit. With the introductions, administration out of the way, Sally, I'd like to perhaps pose the first question to you. In your article, which came out last month, you talked about differences in digital choice architecture of betting platforms, which alters how customers bet. Could you elaborate on what you're seeing in this with regards to illegal and illegal betting operators and that distinctions? How do these different actors use technology to protect or neglect their customers?
Thanks very much, Doug, and thank you for the invitation to be involved in this. It's really important to be mindful of a few basic things when we're talking about gambling harms. First, it's not a minority of people. We're not talking about 1% of people who bet. We're talking about, from most prevalence figures, that 20 to 30% of people who regularly engage in horse betting do experience gambling problems from at least the moderate to severe range. So we're not talking about people who necessarily all meet diagnostic criteria, but people who are experiencing financial harm, psychological stress, and impacts in their broader domain of functioning. Second, it's not the product specifically that is problematic, or the fact that it's online or offline or onshore or offshore. It's how it's provided. So I'm going to provide some examples of what I mean. Obviously, national regulations and code of conduct exist to try and provide critical consumer protections. Now, these might be things like deposit limits, self-exclusion tools, age verification, and requirements to identify consumers who are potentially engaging in risky behaviours. But there's further than that, whether the product is fair, and also looking at marketing promotions. So where technology can become manipulative and coercive includes various marketing techniques, whether it be directly or via social media and affiliate marketing. And when these don't comply with regulations such that they might be manipulative or coercive, particularly to people who are in vulnerable situations and have reduced cognitive capacity. So these might be things like high pay-through requirements that aren't transparent, playing on urgencies, that fear of missing out. We can also look at the game design. So, for example, in Australia, updates just this month, this is the example of gaming machine design, but it prevents manufacturers from displaying irrelevant information such as recent wins. This can happen in other sorts of gambling as well. When you provide information that isn't actually relevant to a future bet, it encourages people to think that there is something about this information that's important. When you design a betting platform such that placing bets larger amounts is physically larger or positioned more prominently, it encourages this behavior. And when you celebrate outcomes where the returns are less than the stake, or inappropriately highlighting things that aren't necessarily beneficial for the customers, these are also problematic. Again, when we're looking at the design of betting platforms, these can sometimes have social features. So it might have a list of people who are currently betting right now. It might have displays of previous successful bets. I've seen websites that say, Sue from Australia just won $1,000 on this particular horse race. My research on these social cues showed that these are actually quite influential, particularly when it targets that sense of similarity. And what we found is that this is actually more influential than where a site is regulated. So these social related cues are going to be more influential than whether the site is domestically licensed or not, in terms of whether I'm going to use that site. Conversely, you can have operators who are acting and using technology in a more proactive way, such as identifying customers who are displaying risk indicators based on behavioral algorithms. And this can prompt a review or a check-in. Sites can also deploy user controls in a more proactive way to make these more user-friendly. And again, in Australia, online betting operators are now required to send customers activity statements that have clear visual summaries to help increase their awareness of how much they're spending. So again, it's not necessarily if the site is onshore or offshore, or whether, what product it offers, but how the technology is used to offer it in a way that does influence risk-taking.
Sally, your points there echo some of the perspectives that I know Martin shared in his Bulletin article. And the next question is for you, Martin. You mentioned in your article that there should be some greater differentiation between the regulation of different types of legal products, for example, between online gaming casinos and sports betting, to lessen the risk of gambling harm. How do you envision those gambling regulators or gambling regulators should approach the operationalization of such betting product distinction?
Thanks, Doug. So perhaps I'll start by stepping back a bit and not answering your question directly, if you don't mind, but leading into it, and firstly, saying something about why we're doing this, why we wrote this this bulletin, about gambling harm. And I'd particularly like to thank Sally, because Sally posed a couple of questions to me around a year ago, especially in relation to, why aren't we looking at the issue of gambling harm, or why aren't we talking about it? Because it's a complicated issue, and certainly those in sports, including racing, and those in legal gambling, the legal gambling industry, don't necessarily think about it with the depth that we need to. And it's a very nuanced subject. And I think, as Sally just pointed out, we can't distinguish between onshore, offshore, legal, illegal as such, as good and bad. And unfortunately, that's another part of what most of us do these days, which is consider complex problems in a binary way. It's not good and bad, black and white, etc. But there are nuances within this issue, and I think we need to consider those nuances, because regulators especially, I believe, are struggling to understand the fast-changing nature of gambling. And that's what I tried to allude to and draw some conclusions about in the article for the last bulletin. And that article was illegal markets and the inadvertent growth of gambling harm by over-regulation of legal markets. So I will get to your question. Don't worry about what regulators should do, but I think it's more a question, first of all, of what regulators should think about. And the reason for that is, I think, as I said in the article, gambling is clearly changing quickly in its very nature. And that's something we intend to write about in the council in the near future even more. The rise of cryptocurrency as a means of payment, a means of bet settlement, the anonymity through certain forms of gambling, the drive offshore, the substantial increase in the number of offshore gambling pseudo-regulators, as Steve Menery and has pointed out in his recent article that we've published as well. So there's a whole range of things that are changing the gambling industry significantly. And I include betting on racing and sports in that gambling industry, obviously. So I think there's a question for regulators about what do they see and what do they perceive in those changes, and how they approach the issue of consumer protection from that. So I think the problem I see for regulators is what they largely see is within the domain of their regulation, and that is legal licensed betting and gambling operators. So I think historically there's been a little bit of almost a blind eye turned to some of the aspects of illegal betting and the growth of that. So where I live now in the United Kingdom, I think, is quite a good example of that. There's been a long-term assumption that the legal licensed betting and gambling markets are pretty much saturated because of the openness of this market and the number of license holders and the way it's regulated. And I think from that assumption, there's been a belief that the illegal market and illegal offshore operators have not really penetrated consumers here, and hence that the issue of gambling harm and risk to consumers is very much in the legal market. So I think that's something we need to change the perception of gambling regulators. And there was obviously one very significant event which turbocharged this development, and that was the COVID-19 pandemic. So although the gambling industry and sports and betting markets are changing and evolving constantly anyway, the pandemic was a tipping point that I think drove even greater changes. And those changes involved some of the things we've written about in the past few years. For example, a far steeper migration of customers and consumers online. Obviously, as we all know, during the pandemic, many people were confined to homes, didn't have their usual leisure activities, couldn't go to sports events, and a lot of sports events weren't even held. So there was a surge of consumers online to various activities, including gambling. Counterintuitively, despite the fact that that a lot of sports were interrupted during COVID, there was certainly an increase in sports betting, partly because of the changing nature of sports that people can bet on. And that's led to some big stickiness with a lot of consumers staying with betting on those sports, in the illegal market that he didn't necessarily bet on before. So there are a lot of products that that we didn't see consumers going to before that they might be going to now, and they may be somewhat more harmful. I defer to Sally on, as you said, we can't just look at the product. It's not a binary question, is one product more harmful than another, but there's certainly the aspect of risk which increases for consumers in the illegal market. So I think we had this surge of consumers to the illegal market. We've had a stickiness of consumers staying in the illegal market, particularly in jurisdictions like the UK, where it's easy to do so. There's very open access to internet, obviously. And I think from that, a lack of understanding of gambling regulators about the impact of that and what it means to the regulation. So I think we need to see a reappraisal by gambling regulators in most jurisdictions of how they approach differentiation between markets. Certainly of gambling regulators recognizing that there are illegal markets. They may not understand the extent of those illegal markets, but they should understand that it's far easier than ever for consumers to either migrate completely to those illegal markets or jump between both of them. And I think that's something we used to see in Hong Kong for many years. Consumers typically would bet in the legal market for some period, often until they didn't have funds available, and then switch to the illegal market where criminals would loan money through loan sharks and credit was much more readily available. So there's a danger in both markets, obviously, but I think what we need to show regulators is that there's a greater level of risk in illegal markets. And I think the final point for regulators, if I could just try to answer your question more directly, is they have to be more aware also of they might cause or increase this drive of consumers to the illegal market by some of their over-regulation in the legal market. Now that's difficult, obviously, because what's over-regulation, what's appropriate, what's not. But I think there has to be a recognition that there should be a definition, a distinction between certain products, certain sectors that are potentially higher risk than others. And that definition should be in certain ways. Tax is a key defining feature. And we're seeing this in real time with the debate in the UK, obviously, where there may be harmonization of tax rates between betting on racing and other sports and online gambling, casino-style gambling, which I would assert is there's a likelihood of a greater risk of harm to consumers from that online repetitive casino-style gambling. Appreciate it's not a binary question, as Sally pointed out. There's risk to both types of gambling activity, but the risk level differs. And I think gambling regulators need to recognize that and recognize that they can distinguish the risk level and alter consumer behavior based on how they regulate. So I'll stop there, Doug, because I think we might go into some details later of what those changes might look like as well.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I just want to take this opportunity to remind our audience, if you've got questions for our panelists, please put them in the Q&A chat function, which you can find at the bottom of the Zoom panel. We've got a couple of questions come in already. Please do keep them coming in. I'm monitoring them. We'll look to put those to Luca, Sally and Martin later, but please put them in the Q&A chat box at the bottom of the Zoom panel. Over to you, Luca. You've got a long background in the design of betting products. Take us through the World Lottery Association's responsible gambling principles, the 7 of them, and how they achieve what they've achieved through the responsible gambling framework of the WLA. Can you tell us also what's coming next and what this will look like in the next 3 to 5 years?
Sure. So thank you very much. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to be here with you today. First, before to answer your question, I would like just to say something about, who I do represent, which are the lotteries, right? And the lotteries have a unique model. Revenues and in particular profits are directed to good causes. Indeed, even to become a member of the WLA, if not the 100%, the vast majority of the profits have to go to good causes. Otherwise, you cannot even become a member of the association. So there, I think there is already this creates, a natural alignment between growth and social benefit. But also, we believe that protecting players and safeguarding the integrity are equally critical to maintain that balance. So that's why the most critical element of corporate social responsibility for the lottery sector is responsible gaming. And as you mentioned, the responsible gaming framework was developed with that in mind, to protect the players. Now we have in our framework four levels for the certification, and already 80% of the members of the association are already over level 2. This is of course not enough, because we continue to push and our members to develop their understanding, their knowledge, and how they apply those principles. But also it's important to remind that our members are committed to fostering the continuity of public order and the fight against illegal gambling, as defined by the governments in their respective jurisdictions. So this effectively provides the background for the WLA responsible gaming principles. Those principles involve WLA members making responsible gaming as an integral part of their daily operations. So it's not like a checkbox that you have, like you're marking this as a compliance. It's part of the DNA of the lotteries. And this involves the employees, the retailers, the stakeholders that are engaged with the lottery. So really, as a 360-degree spectrum. And it involves all the aspects of the business. So our members demonstrate compliance to these principles when they go through the certification process. So because they are contained into the WLA responsible gaming framework. So certification is completed entirely through our digital platform that we have built in conjunction with a like-minded partner, which is called digitalg.com. And the value of that is that they can go through a certification on a full digital process. Several languages are included in that, so that it also reduces the barriers that the language can bring, the culture can bring from different regions. So really, this helps the members to go through the process and get the certification. But then to go back to your question, what is the future of the framework? But I would say in general, right? What I would say is that the future is that for us, only an offer which is sustainable will survive in the future. We would like to see operators be measured not only on what they generate in terms of sales, but really in player well-being. And to do that, of course, we have to work and to make sure that the responsible gaming framework of the WLA adapts to the new trends, to the changes in the demographics. So as to be this a natural development of the framework, but also it involves the use of new technology that can help, of course, develop, strengthen the positions of the lottery in that regards. But also, we believe it's important, the communication within the members, how to share information, best practices. For that, I would like to point out this a project that we start, which is called Project RED for Responsible Ethical, in collaboration with the regional associations, where all members can connect and fundamentally do a benchmarking on what they do on one specific area of their corporate social responsibility program. And that's not only gives them the possibility to do the benchmarking, but also us to collect those information and then generate best practices best case that we can share with our members. It means, okay, you can learn from them because they have approached this topic with that perspective and with their specific knowledge, culture that they bring in. But also in general, it is really sharing, and you can share. You can visit our information hub, which have created especially for that, where you have all the information about the framework, the project red, the magazine, the best practices that we have built. And now we are going to develop in the near future. It's a matter of weeks. There is a collaboration that we're doing with the University of East Carolina on emerging adults. We're doing a study with them because just first of all to understand who they are, their unique risk factors, the latest available research, prevention, as well as awareness suggestion, screening tests to measure their risk, and all this will be available for all our members. But also in general, it's also working with like-minded organizations. That's why we are proudly working with you guys, with the Council of Europe on those topics. We are developing best practices with them on the on reasonable betting. So really, I believe that all in all, it's not only the developing of the tool itself, but it's also this form of collaboration and sharing that will be very important.
Great, thanks, Luca, for that. I'm going to open it up to the three panelists with some questions for all three of you. You all outline in your presentations and in the articles some possible recommendations for gambling harm mitigation. For example, Sally, you mentioned that authorities should geo-block illegal betting websites so that consumers cannot access them. Martin, you float the idea of betting product wallet separation by risk level. And Luca, you mentioned WLA members using AI-based solutions to assist in the assessment of gambling behavior. Could you please take us through any further thoughts you have on these recommendations? And of course, other ancillary recommendations that you have for our audience, and just discuss those in a little bit more detail. Sally, should we kick that one off with you? Geo-blocking and any other recommendations that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So I come as a psychologist, I come from a background thinking about what influences consumer behavior. So there's several different levers we can pull in terms of behavioral change. So one issue is access. So we're looking at how easy it is to engage in this behavior. Geo-blocking obviously assists with that. But for many people, this is just friction. There are obviously ways around these geo-blocking. So for some people who are less computer literate, that's okay. But others, it's just a friction. So it's better to be accompanied by educational messaging, which is informing people that the site they're trying to access is illegal and why this is risky. So this is similar to when you have a browser and you try and click on a site and it automatically blocks it and has a bit of a pop-up, which has a warning sign. You can still usually click through, but you have to, select I'm an advanced option, advanced user, I understand this. Banks do similar things to try and prevent fraud. So my own research shows that many people actually have no idea they're gambling on an offshore site. So education and redirection is often a useful first step. You might highlight what is risky about gambling on online sites. For people who are doing this in a more intentional way, so that's not sufficient friction for them, then the interventions might need to be more persuasive. So then we might want to draw on attitudes and social norms. So this might include highlighting that offshore sites can be involved in organised crime or harming people, pulling on those thoughts of being a conscious citizen, or your personal attitudes. You can be risked and subject to fraud or identity theft. That's those personal privacy concerns. But I do think that this has to be combined with making the alternate option, the behavior that you're trying to motivate, because it's not just about don't use an offshore site, it's about the value of why you should prefer a domestic site. So this might be similar to then taking a consumer approach similar to car manufacturers and banks, where they're actually marketing to customers that they're actually looking after you for your lifetime. And this is where I think gambling operators need to be much more proactive in taking greater efforts to communicate directly with consumers how they make consumer safety a priority and how they balance this to a greater extent with the commercial efforts to maximize spend. Because ultimately, if the customer really believes that the domestic site is going to be a much better offering for them, then that's going to motivate behavior better than any actual blocks on their behavior.
Right, thanks. Sally, that's incredibly insightful. Martin, over to you. Sorry, Luca, over to you for your thoughts.
Sorry. Sure, Doug. So, I mean, first of all, I can just echo what Sally just said, and also we have created a brochure about that, in the fight against illegal, where we mention, the several gold rules that every operator should apply. So I invite people attending that to go to the website and look at that. But to answer your question from an IT and an artificial intelligence perspective, the value of the artificial intelligence, it's really to use it to exploit for the benefits of the players. So the good value that is that it helps to determine the player age. So you wanted to make sure that underage gaming playing is not allowed. So that could be very good tool. Protect a vulnerable player through the real-time monitoring of their play, and and suggest them what they should do. You can send customer alerts to raise awareness of their player habits. You can provide them with their data about what they're spending, what is the time that they've spent on playing, and you can provide suggestions as well. Could be the break, set play limit, and so on. So those are use that have been implemented by several of our members. So they use artificial intelligence to send us nudge messages, to identify the players. But also we have some specific cases, and I would like to mention one of our members, Singapore in particular, that they have used artificial intelligence with the use of neural networks. So the machine learning in reality behind that, to try to estimate the size of the legal market in the region, also to do a scan of the web to see what are the illegal sites that are entering in their jurisdictions. We have also our members that have used the tool for a prevention perspective. But also us as an association, we have decided to invest into that and to support a project which is run by the University of Lausanne to develop a standardized estimation method for sizing the illegal market. Because we believe, and as a part of that, there are like-minded organizations, of course, the Council of Europe, Interpol, the FBI, UNODC is part of that, because we all believe that estimating what is the size, it will be very helpful, not only for us to know, but especially for policymakers, for regulators to understand what is happening in their jurisdictions. And the value of that is to generate a scalable tool that could be used as many times as we want. So that is the value. But also, I would like also to point out to the use of artificial intelligence and for preserving the integrity in sports. And for that, I could refer to the platform that has been developed for ULIS. So where it is a platform that is based on artificial intelligence, which helps us, to indeed do a deeper analysis of the events, match the competitions. So really helped us to boost the number of events that we can have a look at. So we have more than 100,000 events a year that we are able to do a proper analysis on that and understanding what is happening. So the use of artificial intelligence, the correct use of artificial intelligence, I would say, it's an added value to us and to our members.
Great. Thanks, Luca. And last but not least, Martin. And Martin, just to remind you, you've floated the idea of betting product wallet separation by risk level. Can you just offer your further thoughts on that particular recommendation?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Doug. So I think that's going back to what's required from regulators. And as I said, I think we do need regulators to better differentiate between legal and illegal products, and not just look at the visible market that they can easily see, which is licensed operators. So what I think has struck me from the debate going on, especially in the UK in the past several years, is this differentiation between online casino-style gaming and betting on racing and other sports. And I think most reasonable people would agree they're definitely different activities. There may be at times the same consumers engage in both, but there are large parts of the consumer market that are passionate about betting on racing and sometimes other sports that are quite different from those who may be engaged in online casino-style gaming. But the legal license industry doesn't help that differentiation. And I think they need to be pushed through regulation to ensure that differentiation. So I think there should be a separation of wallets, and just for everyone who's not into sports betting and gambling, obviously the wallet on a website is where the consumer deposits money, and then that money is used for betting on horse racing, betting on sports, or switching across to betting on online repetitive casino-style games. I think to differentiate those products and to differentiate the potential higher risk of some of those products, the wallet should be separated. If legal licensed operators want to offer casino-style games, they should be through a different wallet so that a consumer has to switch across to that wallet from betting on horse racing and other sports. And that ensures some separation. Obviously, a lot of betting operators don't like that because it's friction, but that friction is important as part of the differentiation of the products and the potential differing risk levels and harm levels of those products. Although I accept it, risk levels is a blurred area. So I think the wallet is one thing, but that won't happen without regulation. It's not something that operators will voluntarily do, but it should come from regulation. And that's another part of differentiating the legal and the illegal market, because obviously the illegal market will not do that.
Thanks, Martin. Effective engagement is a key in helping stakeholders understand, I think, Sally, to your point, what's illegal and what's legal, and what also actually causes gambling harm and how it can be effectively tackled. Luca, I believe it's actually one of the WLA's key responsible gambling principles. So a question before we open to the floor, and there have been a number of questions posed so far. Please do feel free to add any more questions that you have to ask into the chat box below. A question to the three of you is, what have your been experiences when dealing with stakeholders on the issue of responsible gambling with regards to stakeholder engagement? What have you learned for all of us so that we can do it better? Luca, I'm just wondering if you could kick us off on that particular one.
Sure. So that's a $1 million question, right? So I would like to say that the work to tackle this is ongoing and multifaceted, right? It requires cooperation within different stakeholders and continual effort to raise awareness of the issue across the entire lottery and sports betting and sports ecosystem, and even beyond that. What I think personally is that, and I would like to use a punchline for that, is that, in 10 years, as I briefly mentioned before, the only gaming that will survive, in my opinion, is a sustainable gaming. So this means that responsible gaming must be embedded by design. So we should not even talk about that. It should be simply part of that. Like I mentioned before, it should be a cultural shift on measuring success not only in revenues but really in player well-being. Would like to see players that are empowered with simple tool to use to understand what is happening around them and to them. And the key takeaways for that is that a gold standard is where responsible gaming isn't an add-on, is the DNA of that. So that's then how to achieve that. That's why I said it's $1 million question, is that, as I said, it requires effort, cooperation with various stakeholders. From our perspective, it involves, research as well. So work with university to do specific research to generate awareness about the topic. So really, in brief, we must work with as many stakeholders as we can to raise awareness of the issue and provide useful help and resources from our members so that they can assist their players as when required.
Right, thanks, Luca. Martin, I know that you have also had a wealth of experience in stakeholder engagement, whether it's on illegal betting, on illegal betting as well as on responsible gambling. So I'm just wondering if you could add to that.
Sorry, could you, would you like me to put that in the context of the question about France? Perhaps that would be easier with stakeholder engagement. It's
Yes, sure. So yes, there is a question
Sure.
from the audience around the fight against illegal betting in France. The question is for Martin. What do you think about the fight against illegal betting, referencing a 2023 PwC study in relation to illegal gambling websites? I think, Martin, you can see that particular question, which is a very well put question. So over to you.
Yes, and thank you, Corentin, who is from Council of Europe. I know, so it's and Corentin is in the middle of this this struggle to protect sports from corruption, and part of that driven by illegal betting, obviously. So I won't say too much about the ANJ because I know what it's been doing in the past few years, but only as an observer. So I'm not an expert on the French market, obviously, or the French regulator. But I would say, Corentin, it does seem that the ANJ is a good example of how a gambling regulator is leading the understanding of changing gambling markets. And I'll give another example of that if I could. I think the ANJ was quite quick to make a public statement after the US presidential election to clarify that Polymarket, which is a prediction market, is essentially illegal in France because it's not licensed as a gambling operator, despite the fact that probably, as you know, many prediction market operators are not seeking gambling licenses because they're quite onerous to do, but they're seeking licenses, certainly in the US, under various financial sector licensing conditions. And I think that was a very good step by the ANJ, showing that it understood this very fast changing nature of gambling, how consumer preferences change quickly as well, and they could shift once a platform such as this is made available. So obviously they can't stop that platform because it's internet based, and it can operate from anywhere. But I think there's a point for the gambling regulator that the ANJ, I think, is showing well, that you have to show consumers what's appropriate in the market, not just what's legal and what's illegal, but obviously legal licensed operators are appropriate because they're subject to certain licensing conditions and active regulation by the ANJ, but anything not licensed is not. And hence, as I've been saying in my article, that there is a risk of greater gambling harm from those unlicensed operators because of that, because they don't conform to any gambling regulations and would ignore them, despite the fact we have an offshore pseudo-regulatory system, as I said. So I think the ANJ is clearly leading the way in that. I think paying attention also to the size of the illegal market. it's a little bit difficult to go with numbers and say how many players go to the illegal market, what is the size of the illegal market. We're quite cautious from the IFHA about market sizing. The PwC study, as Corentin mentioned, estimated 3 to 4 million players used illegal gambling sites in the past year, 2023, in France. That's quite credible and not unusual in a country the size of France. So I think obviously, if we accept that that's a reasonably credible figure, we should also accept that that figure is likely to increase and not decrease if there's no active intervention by regulators. So I think, again, the ANJ is showing that active intervention, active indication to consumers of the differentiation between licensed, unlicensed, legal, illegal, online betting and gambling sites is essential. In terms of blocking, it's a contentious subject. I know Doug is going to be writing something about that later this year or early next year. And we've had many discussions about that over the years from Hong Kong as well, where Doug and I worked. I think it's obviously clear to everyone with a little bit of technology knowledge that blocking websites is not effective as long as people know how to use a VPN. However, I think it's important from a regulatory perspective, and the ANJ obviously looking at this as well, to signal to consumers when they go to a website that it is blocked. If a sign comes up on your webpage saying this site is blocked from access in your jurisdiction because it's not licensed, that sends a message to the consumer. If the consumer then wants to work around that with a VPN, that's fine. It's a consumer choice, but it's important that the regulator takes that measure to educate consumers about what's legal, what's not illegal, so that consumer choice is much more clear. Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Martin, for that and taking that particular question. So back to this question about effective stakeholder engagement. Sally, you were talking a little bit about education before. What has your been experience? What are the pain points? Where are the areas for improvement?
Yeah, well, again, I'll bring the clinical psychology voice into the room and say the largest group that is neglected in terms of these conversations is the consumer. I'd be curious for everyone on this call of whether you've actually directly spoken to someone individually and at length who has personally experienced gambling harm firsthand, as well as someone who's experienced gambling harm through someone else's gambling. And I don't mean a one-off presentation from someone from an organized company whose job it is to give lived experience, which is certainly a useful thing to do, but it needs to go further than that. And it's not sufficient that it's only the people who answer the phone calls in your company, that all executives, all board members, everyone who is involved in the provision of a product which regularly leads to harm, do really have a good understanding of what this means, not at a statistical level, but at a personal level. And I can tell you, if you have that front of mind, and if you think about the fact that there are no groups who are immune from this, you will start designing your products, will hopefully start designing your products differently. And I'll roll into that, Doug, to answer just one of the first questions posed about where the figures come from in terms of the harm, because we're all very well versed in the 1% figure. The 1% figure, which is a little bit up, a little bit down, tends to be a population level prevalence. So if we look across the whole population of adults, we can say around 1% of these people experience gambling harm, which is great, except for the fact that not everyone engages in gambling, and certainly not everyone engages in gambling regularly. The 20 to 30% figures is what happens when we look at people who regularly engage in these products, and they again vary between products. For something like horse racing and online horse racing, which it typically really now is these days, of people who gamble regularly on horse racing, and this is from an Australian figure, so it will vary between jurisdictions, but prevalence rates are relatively similar across jurisdictions. Of people who bet at least once a month, it's 20 to 30% who experience moderate and severe harms. So it is certainly important for everyone to speak to people who are engaged with their own product and how they've developed harms, to bring that insight into all of the work that we're doing to provide that product.
Right, thanks, Sally. Last but not least, Luca, on this question around effective stakeholder engagement. Sorry, I've already asked you that question. Apologies, Luca. Luca, though, can I stay with you? Because we do have one question from the audience, which I'd like to pose to you. And I'd like to also take this opportunity to invite any last questions from the audience to our panelists. Please put them in the chat box. The question, Luca, from Andreas, thank you for your question. Regarding the question of over-regulating and pushing customers to the illegal market, what do you say of the risk of operators not acting responsible and offering more dangerous, i.e. more easy to manipulate betting offers just because they can, if the market in question is not sufficiently regulated? Risk can be that profits are more important than taking responsibility.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks for the question. I mean, I think it is right. There is always a balance to strike. You know, over-regulation can indeed push players towards illegal operators, but the opposite risk is just as real. You know, when markets are under-regulated, some operator may exploit those gaps by offering high-risk betting products, with the objective of prioritizing their profits over the responsibility of the players. So it could be an example if we look at this as sports betting. It could be, you know, very low tier competition or exotic bet that not only are more dangerous for players, but also far easier to manipulate, which create integrity risk for the whole sports ecosystem. So that's why from a USWLA, we advocate for a robust but balanced regulation. So, you know, regulation should prevent harmful betting products and ensure standards of responsibility. But at the same time, it should keep the legal regulated offer attractive, so players stay within the safe channel. So for our solution, it's not about more or less regulation, but I would say better regulation that both protects players and preserves the integrity of competition. I know that also by saying that it's easy to say, but more difficult to implement. But we should, in my opinion, really not look at more or less regulation, but really how to better regulate the market that we are in, because and there is not one magic way of regulating it. So because something that may apply, going back to the example that Martin and Corentin were referring in France, could work very well there, might not work in another jurisdiction, even within the same region, or even within Europe. So that's why I think we have to have a regulation that matches also the countries in that we're looking at.
Thanks, Luca. And just conscious of time, everyone, I think we're getting to that point in the webinar where I throw it open to the floor with, for the panelists' final comments, how would they like to leave their messages for the audience and their key points. So for the three of you, Martin, perhaps starting with you, what would your final messages be for our audience today?
I won't give any closing generic comments, but I'd like to again help answer that question, I think, from Andreas, which is a good one, which is useful to close with before we hand over to Sally. I think Andreas is quite right. There is a risk in any jurisdiction that that operators simply offer more harmful products because they can, and those being, you know, various marketing activities pushing customers to the illegal market. Various marketing activities that attract customers to more risky forms of gambling. But I think I'd also highlight that that there are now far more, can we say, workarounds online to attract consumers away from even those harmful parts of the legal market. And again, I'll use a UK example, if I may, because I'm here. It's very easy to find non-GamStop websites and recommendations for non-GamStop websites online. And for those of you in other jurisdictions, GamStop is a way for consumers to exclude themselves from gambling. But if you look online and you look at non-GamStop, there are an awful lot of directions to websites and operators. They're essentially offshore, and the reason that they say they're offering these non-GamStop websites for betting and other forms of gambling are to say it's hard to lift the ban. Well, it's meant to be hard, obviously, if you're a consumer and you want to restrict your own addictive behavior. There are fewer restrictions on these sites. There are bigger bonuses, more games, higher limits, more banking options, welcome bonuses, free spins, reload bonuses, cashback offers, loyalty rewards, etc., etc. So I think going to that question from Andreas, that's the reason why it's not just the legal market we should focus on, because whatever the dangers in the legal market of certain regulators, certain operators acting irresponsibly, I think times 100 in the illegal market. That's the concern I have. But I don't detract from the fact that definitely in certain jurisdictions, there are legal operators that need to be held to account for those inappropriate activities.
Thanks, Martin. Luca, just any final thoughts for our audience?
I mean, more than final thoughts, I would say that, you know, just to probably to wrap up on and going back to your original question at the beginning that you pointed out as well, you know, it's what is the WLA position with the responsible gaming certification and how this could compare to others. So I think it's quite unique because, I mean, the lotteries ecosystem, as I said at the beginning, it's unique, but it's based on a very specific framework, structural maturity model with the 4 levels, as I mentioned before. Independent and credible certification. I mean, all certification goes through an independent assessment panel outside of the industry. Generates benchmark and best practices, and that's very important to benchmark yourself against your peer, but also, you know, to get these best practices. And then also the integration with the other WLA standards, because this also works hand in hand with the WLA security certification. And along with the integrity guidelines that we have provided, this really generates an holistic approach to ensure that members are not just responsible, I would say, in one area, but across all the dimensions: security, integrity, and social responsibility.
Thanks, Luca. Last but not least, Sally, the floor is yours for the last 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Doug. And I really appreciate this opportunity and congratulate everyone on attending the webinar and taking this as seriously as it should be taken. Again, I'll kind of draw back to my previous comments that there are always going to be balance. You know, this is going to be a tricky situation. There's different groups of consumers that you're trying to cater for, different parts of the businesses. And it's why I encourage this to be embraced as a general preventative tool and a benefit for customers. It's all about the messaging and communication. We're not trying to necessarily restrict people or do something to people they don't want to experience. Treatment is not the responsibility of, you know, horse racing providers or regulators. It's not expected that we reduce, you know, a diagnosable mental health disorder or stop this from ever happening. But it is important to think about prevention, about the contribution of any regulation and product and environment to the risk of the mental health disorders and to the problem being caused, and focus much more on prevention of what I've been doing for many, many years now is how to have conversations with people about engaging in gambling in a sustainable way, rather than only focusing on that really what we call the pointy end, the people who have very experienced, severe, well-developed harms. Let's flip that around, focus on the majority of consumers who are engaged in this product, and think about how can we avoid harms developing? How can we encourage people to think about and to learn skills to gamble in a sustainable manner, like we do with cars and with banking, with alcohol consumption? How do we do this in a low risk way? So this is something I'm currently, we were just chatting, I'm in Spain at the moment on my Churchill Fellowship, which is all about developing digital products to help people think about their gambling in a sustainable way. So I'm very happy for anyone to reach out to learn more about this, to chat with me directly. And again, I really congratulate the IFHA for the level of leadership, everyone on this call as a speaker and attending in the leadership in terms of looking at proactive consumer harm reduction in terms of preventing the problems in the first place.
Thank you, Sally. Thanks, Martin, and thanks, Luca, for your final thoughts there. Unfortunately, everyone, that's all that we have time for in this particular webinar. If you've still got any questions, please do feel free to reach out to the council at the council email address, which you can find on the council website. We will do our best to respond. Please don't also forget to sign up to the council's publications via the QR code, which leaves me only to thank our distinguished panelists again for their insights on how to mitigate gambling harm caused by illegal betting, and you, as well as our audience, as Sally mentioned, for your time and interest in this very, very important topic. Please join us in the future for IFHA webinars and presentations as we talk to global experts on illegal betting and related criminal issues. And until then, goodbye.
Thanks, Doug.